I'm Mal. This is Mike. We're back with NFT Culture Tech Tuesdays. Mike, how's it going? Is
Going good.
that the first time you've seen the sunlight in a while?
It is actually. It's kind of bright. I forgot that I took a lot of flack for the politics is bullshit unboxing because my camera was so terrible. So I think when I have a lot of light on me, then the camera works a little bit better. So I apologize to all the audience out there about my lack of high quality equipment. It'll be improved soon enough.
I think we just need to change your settings that you can't do right now and change it from 720 to 1080.
Oh yeah, probably.
It's just an offline setting.
Yeah, I'm gonna get the same camera that John got. I'm gonna get a new camera. Gonna get the one John got because his looks really good.
Tech Tip Tuesday. Buy a new
Yes,
camera.
that's
Man,
true.
what's going on with NFTs?
And it's crazy, like all the Board Ape hype, like making the market all jump all over the place. Is the other side happening? Is a little bit of possible alpha, which isn't normally what I even care about or talk about, but Arcade Land, like published a tweet where they have the picture of the little submarine thing with all the different characters in it from other side, which does that mean that Arcade Land is going to be integrated with other sides somehow? I don't know. What does it mean?
Yeah, I mean, who knows? I wouldn't be surprised if, like, behind the scenes, they're going to announce Arcade and Animoca and Yuga are acquiring them just because they did the game and the game worked so well. Like,
Hmm.
for the type of game that it was, like it was pretty cool. And I sold one of my plots of that land, but I'm definitely keeping one because of, you and I've. Well, I guess we'll probably go in reverse order today, and let's start with metaverses because you've been kind of on this tangent. Like once every month, you and I talk about the metaverse, and I really am sad that I don't own any Decentraland or Sandbox.
Hmm.
um and when you think about like what my strategy is, I'm going all in on the other side. Like I'm going to claim the ones that I can claim, and I hope that they don't screw it up, but I'm gonna probably spend like 100% of my mutant ape on like
Okay.
trying to buy as much land as I can. And just because like I think it's going to be the premier metaverse, and I could be wrong, but I also want I want to start building out some community spaces for NFT culture, and I want to like have something cool. So for me, I hope that it is the other side. I hope that it's awesome, but I'm talking to people in some of these private discords. I know a guy who spent 100 ETH on Ape and plans to deploy 100% of that at land because they think that that metaverse is so it's going to be so groundbreaking and so different. And so it's going to be interesting to see kind of what happens with that and if it really does take off.
Yeah, I kind of see it as like there's two possibilities that will happen, and we can't possibly know which one's going to happen. But possibility A is you have like the Ready Player One scenario where it's like one company builds one starter metaverse, and then that thing is sufficiently engaging and sufficiently scalable where it grows into the metaverse. And then you have this one company that is just going to be kind of like the Amazon or Google of metaverse, and they're going to be like the biggest company that ever will exist. So that's kind of like one possible school of thought. The other possible school of thought, and there's maybe more, but the other thing that comes obvious to my, or comes to the forefront in my mind is it's not possible for one company to build a metaverse. And if we have a bunch of disassociated metaverses, then all we've done is rebuilt Web 2.0 on the blockchain, which is completely a useless use case. So the other possibility is we have kind of like a series of disjoint but interconnected things that you can kind of move through seamlessly in a way that makes it feel like one thing. And to me, like the way most software kind of usually works is it's separate systems that are glued together in some way. So to me, I would say that's the more likely scenario. And it's also, I think, good for everybody because then it means if you want to build your own metaverse, you're not competing with the thing. You're just going to plug into the thing. But one thing that I kind of came up with the observation today, and maybe other people have observed it, but maybe not. But I think it kind of warrants discussion. Is you can't. One of the biggest problems with Web 2.0 is managing identity across systems. Like we have, like most companies that have built a website in Web 2.0 world, they have like their own private database of credentials, and then like they acquire some company, and that company has its own private database, and you got to somehow mash those together. Otherwise, users have to change their usernames, which is horrible. Or you rely on one of the standardized identity providers like Google or Facebook, and I know Twitter does it a little bit, and then probably Microsoft also does it. So that's kind of, we have a few standards of identity, and then you either use those or use your own internal network, but no one is consistent, so you can never have fully integrated authenticated system. What's really cool about Web 3.0 is it's kind of like identity from the start, because your identity is your wallet, and your wallet is unique across all people on that inside Web3, which is awesome. So what that means is that that problem that really held back unified system in Web 2 is actually from the day one solved and ready to go on Web 3. And so what that means is that the hardest part of integrating systems in my software career has been dealing with having those stupid two identity databases. That's already solved. So that means that integrating two systems is really just imagining what that integration looks like. So it's purely kind of a creative problem, which is awesome. So I really think that the foundation for this integrated, separate multiverse metaverse is there. We just got to have people start to build it, and that's also why I'm happy we started the conversation on Arcade Land, is because their stated goal is this unified series of metaverses. And I think that's probably the most realistic approach. I don't think one company, Facebook, is over there trying to do it, and they have $50 billion of cash or whatever that they're throwing at that massive problem. And Zuckerberg is intent on, he wants to be the king sitting on the throne. So he's throwing that might. They're really the only company in the world that has that capacity to maybe have a stab at it. That's how hard of a problem it is to make a compelling metaverse on your own. Then we
Yeah.
have this kind of ragtag bunch of apps led by Arcade Land in a way. So I'm really
Yeah.
excited about it.
Yeah, I don't want to discount Arcade Land, but I also don't want to give them too much credit. But it's
Sure.
funny, like to use the Ready Player One analogy, I think it's going to be some like conglomeration of like Ready Player One, and like Wreck It Ralph 2, Ralph
Okay.
Wrecks the Internet, right?
Yeah.
And like when you think of like Ready Player One, right? IOI, like the bad guys, and like they definitely feel like Facebook and all of those types of things where they want to own everything and they want to do it. But then like the other thing about like in Ready Player One, I forget what the Oasis is the one metaverse, right? And there's all these like offshoots where everyone builds within the metaverse.
Mm-hmm.
But I also think that we were talking last night to Habitat, which was like exhilarating for me, and I really wish I could go back and do that interview with them because like Habitat is an NFT project from like Shop Architecture, which is like one of the top premier architecture firms in the entire world. When you look at the buildings that they've built in the real life, from Barclays Center to like
Mm-hmm.
designed and all these things in their partnerships, like when you think about like artists creating art and doing really cool stuff, and Mike, next time you and I are together, I'll show you the app. Like they gave me private access to see all the buildings in 3D,
Sweet.
AR, VR,
Awesome.
all these things. And so like I think like that's going to be cool. But what's really important for me for the metaverse is a set of standards. To go back to your point with what Arcade's doing, is that if we can get to a point where the standards are enough, and for instance, if I'm in Sandbox or Decentraland or Other Side or Arcade, um, I have a set of standards for if I want to make my avatar 2D, make it 3D, make it voxel, and I can just kind of between that and
Mm-hmm.
whatever experience I'm in. Because some people may have the preferred experience of it feeling like Ultima Online from the '90s. Others may want to
Mm-hmm.
have the WoW experience. Others may want to have the voxel experience of something like Minecraft. I think that there's like, could you say that again? Thanks. There's so much potential for that, and so I agree with you. I think like the best thing that could happen is to have a set of metaverses that, regardless if I own land in them or not, the PFP that I identify with, the objects that I have that become equipable, and I think that also becomes like unique to say that, you know, some avatar that has custom gear that's really high value in Decentraland. And so I may not even want to be an ape because I've leveled and played these games and have some super unique item that I, you know, want to have on my person or
Hmm.
whatever being I am there. So I think that that's really cool to start thinking about how that happens. But to your point is, does it, you know, but the to King Tannis, can, you know, we're very very early in that. Like today there was an article in Bloomberg about how Web3 is not going to make it because it's clunky. And it's like, if you think about how clunky the internet was from 1995 to like 2008, like it wasn't completely seamless even in the early days of Facebook. So I think that if it becomes seamless and the experience can be the same, where I can just port into there and have fun, I think there's some really cool things. Or is there a hub? And Mike, to your point, I think Arcade wants to set themselves up to be that hub. And then when you think
Hmm.
about real, and I'm sorry, I keep going on diatribes. A lot of things that happen with like the modern games is, can you have like mini games that are going on while you're transitioning between these hubs? So like while you're offloading other side and heading into Decentraland, let's say it takes 15 seconds. Say it takes 30 seconds. Can you play a mini game against other people that are in the metaverse that are transitioning to, that are playing a 2D version of Mario Kart or something?
Hmm. Yeah, it's funny that he brought up switching between metaverses is annoying. That's kind of like why I brought up that point of earlier of like it really needs to be seamless when you're switching between metaverses for it to feel like it's a metaverse. So like if you think about when you're browsing the web, like you don't your brain no doesn't think about like I'm switching from Wikipedia to Google or from Google to OpenSea. You don't really even think about the fact that you're switching between providers while you're browsing the web because it's fast and you're used to it and it all feels like one browsing experience. I think um, eventually, like the early versions of the metaverse are going to be clunky. The very first integrations where you can move between the two, it'll probably be a loading screen, which kind of really jerks you out of it. But I think as people realize the value of that transition, and that's why I think having kind of that marketplace of metaverses that are interconnected is really important because those providers that can provide it to you in a really smooth and seamless experience, people are going to either um, replicate what they did or die. So those ones that are really seamless, the most like immersive, those are going to be the ones that people are going to just want to naturally go to. And then I think eventually that kind of evolutionary process will make the metaverse feel a lot like just browsing the web. So it'll be a eventually it'll be a real seamless experience. The value of seamlessness will be kind of well known to everybody, so everybody will learn the tricks in order to how to do it, which I think is important. But yeah, that your point about there being a hub, I think is really interesting. Like, man, that's a lot of power right there. Whoever positions themselves in the middle between everything. The only other point I had was like it's impossible to know who is going to be the winner. Just like in 1999, if someone would ask you like, well, what website's going to win e-commerce? Like, would you have picked a bookstore? I don't know if Newegg was around back then, but like
Well,
there
I mean,
was,
let's keep it simple. I mean, like, you know, Yahoo, you know, Alta
yeah,
Vista, web
who's going to
crawl. I
win
used
search?
web crawler and like was a holdout for
Yeah,
so long.
I
Like,
know.
back in the 90s, or like let's even back up even more, America Online,
Yeah.
right? Like I think, and that's the thing that like I always go back to, where everyone, like when Micah Johnson talks about Aku and creating these experiences, when Tom Bilyeu talks about creating the next Disney, when these visionaries are talking about like doing really cool stuff, it's like who, and this kind of brings us to the next point, unless you have any more thoughts on the metaverse. When we should start talking about the metaverse a lot more, but
Hmm.
like who are we to judge someone that says they're going to create the next thing? Like the turnover of Fortune 500 companies is so frequent, that, you know, if you look at, and I don't know the numbers, I'm just paraphrasing, this isn't anywhere accurate, but if you look at the Fortune 500 from like 10, not 10, let's call it 25 years ago, it's a very small percentage of the Fortune 500 companies from 20 years ago, or go back further to 50 years, are in there.
Hmm.
And so when we think about the challenge that we have and the mindset of embracing these new technologies, you know, once people get in their mode and their rigor and the things that are happening, they get disrupted, right? When you and I have been gamers and we've played a lot of video games together, and we've only known each other for 20 years, and we were both gamers for quite a while before that, in our formative years. But even when, you know, we started gaming and playing, you know, Diablo 2 and like GTA 3 and Vice City and San Andreas, like we would have never thought that mobile gaming would come in and create gotcha and all these currencies where people would be, you know, paying for skins, paying to win, and all
Hmm.
that. And so once I saw that that could happen and everything else, like who am I to presume that these models won't change? And that's what's really frustrating to me. Like Mahjong today, and I'm a big fan of Microsoft for what they've really fixed a lot of things. I'm not a big fan of Microsoft, but I think Microsoft is doing a lot of good things to try and rebrand themselves as an
Yeah.
innovative company. And if you just look at their financials and what they've been able to do, it's hard to say that they've been stagnant. But then you look at companies like Mahjong, who had Roblox like on their coattail, like really stealing a lot of market share, now coming in and like their developers are signing petitions. We have companies that are coming out openly against NFTs. And I think like part of that challenge from a technical standpoint is like two things I think are really going on right now. It's like one is there's ignorance. Some of that ignorance is intentional. I think that um, people want to hop onto social narratives. People want to have the easy thing. People want to claim that, you know, NFTs are bad for the environment without actually like understanding it. And I think that's an easy narrative that people can get a hold of. And there are some truths to it, but there's also a lot of falsehoods to it.
Hmm.
Um, and I also think that when you think about like the fundamental principles of like why I believe a AAA studio, you know, a AAA game is going to come from NFTs before it comes from a AAA studio, is because when you think about like the bureaucracy of navigating the nuance of a new asset class, digital ownership, or you're fundamentally giving up rights to, you know, your IP, and the fact that someone can start doing their own things with that. I think that the traditional ecosystem that exists today with, you know, some of the, and I don't want to make this about capitalism or anything else, but like inherently some of the control of that, and what profits fair and what that actually means becomes really tricky. And so for me, when you start getting into boardrooms, when you get into shareholders, when you get into like those types of things, and maximizing every dollar that you can, your ability to create something that it does offer digital ownership, that does give up some of those rights, becomes challenging. And so then if you know, Occam's razor down to a game developer, if they spend a lot of time creating something, whether it is that metaverse, whether it is that experience, and this is actually why I love the metaverse. I don't want to bring it back there yet. Um, but the metaverse, the idea around the metaverse is to create an awesome place for unique experiences to excite and delight the community. And then I think what Yuga's doing with like creating Ape and creating a marketplace within there is to say, okay, if this is, and now we're talking about other things, but like let's say we remove ape, but creating currencies and create ways that companies can actually make money and value out of it. And then the end user can now create their stuff. And then we think about the gig economy and we think about those types of aspects. This is the gig economy that is in Web3, that is in this, that artists can make money off their art in perpetuity. And so all of these things are coming together, and then I look at these articles and I'm like, yeah, it sucks that my favorite developers are FUDing NFTs. And like, I can't even read video game news anymore because every single news source is like, NFTs are the devil, people in Web3 don't know what they're talking about, and it just gets old and tiring. And I'm like, I'm kind of
Yeah.
done with it.
Yeah. I feel like it's part of that age old like phases of crypto, like steps. Like everybody starts out, it's a scam. Then everybody starts out, it's not a scam, but it's a Ponzi. Then everybody goes to, oh, it's legitimate, but it's like gonna be, it's a bubble and it's gonna pop, and then it's gonna be worth nothing. And then people will continue to find, there's a few more phases where people will find stuff. Like the environment things, like I think the environment argument is an extremely surface level argument. Like for like the very main counter to that argument is Ethereum is stated goal and actively pursued goal is moving to proof of stake, which vastly mitigates that argument. But it's just a classic example of the system gets built and there's winners and losers, and the winners rise to the top, and then the winners use the regulatory system to preserve their place as the winners. And so the system is always going to naturally resist any sea change that's going to come down the road. And Nifty's just, well, Nifty's and crypto and digital property and smart contracts represents a sea change from the old system to the new system. But at the end of the day, once people kind of learn the value and the benefits, it's just an unstoppable force. It's just like the internet. A lot of people resisted the internet. People were like, "You can never sell books on the internet. How do you get them to people? They're heavy. It'll
You
be
put
so
your credit
expensive.
card on the internet, there's
You put your
hackers.
credit card on the internet. That's crazy. You don't sell books or put your credit card on the internet." And then now look where we are. The largest retail corporation in the world is an internet like company. So I think like one thing, some points that I've kind of found to talk about besides proof of stake, like um, it's surprising to me when programmers resist Nifty's and metaverse, because programmers know more than anybody else that computers can't. I mean, you can make. I've seen people make the case that computer code could be racist in the nature of how it was written. It favors certain people or not. But at the end of the day, a CPU evaluating code, it can't put any sort of opinion or perception into how it evaluates code. Like computers evaluate code in just a clean and unadulterated um, workflow. So if we can design our legal system and our property system to be managed by computers, to me it becomes a more fair system, because there there might be bias in the code, but most of the code is often open source and we can figure out how that bias works. But it actually is engineering out those inherent biases that exist in the human system. So I think one aspect of why I think metaverse and crypto and all those things will inherently catch on is once people realize, and programmers should know this above anybody else, that the fairness of the system is going to create a lot of value. And then the other thing is, like, digital property is inherently less carbon intensive than physical property, no matter how you spin it. Like you can say, oh, hey, you need the energy of a small European country to run this crypto network. But then when I say, yeah, but if I make sneakers in this crypto network, that is energy that we wouldn't have made to make sneakers in the physical world, which would have been 50 or 100 times more carbon than making it in the digital world. So I think when you hear arguments about like the environmental concern, like you have to kind of look several steps down the road beyond where we're at right now. Like obviously artwork, and especially with people using inefficient contracts, the environmental impact is negative on the face of it. But if you look at it like it's not, NFTs are an application of smart contracts. They're not the reason for smart contracts to exist. Smart contracts exist because we can now have digital property. Like that is the value that we got out of those smart contracts. What does it mean to have digital property that doesn't use any sort of resources versus physical property where, like, if you want to have an ivory keyboard, like for your piano in the digital world, you didn't have to kill any elephants. To have it in the physical world, you had to kill some elephants. So people can have the property they want without consuming resources in the physical world. Everything, making things digital increases our bandwidth
Yeah.
by 100,000 or a million. And so we can provide tangible things to people that are digital at a much more fair and broad scale than we could in the real world. And I think people kind of don't consider that part of the argument.
It's funny, like everyone's like, oh yeah, like land in the metaverse, land, digital land, and all these things. And it's like, yeah, but we've been dealing with like digital currency for 10 years now, and everyone's fine with that. So like once you trust your money to the space, like, and you assume that innovation is going to occur, like look at Final Fantasy 1 that came out in like 1989, right? Look at Final Fantasy 6 that came out in 1992. Look at Final Fantasy 10 that came out in 2000. So like an 11-year gap that happened, and then you look at like Final Fantasy 15 and you look at like what happens today, and then you assume that as long as like Moore's law continues in some form of fashion, we already have all these things. Like eventually, like our poly count and everything else is just going to continue to get. This one, I don't think we're going to touch gutter cats today, but I do think that I did want to talk about, Fran Elation's comment briefly. And we've talked about this quite a bit. Yes. And I agree. Discourse. I'm actually replaying Final Fantasy V right now. I just finished Final Fantasy VI. If you follow me or you're my friend in Discord, you'll see when I'm actually taking breaks to play some Final Fantasy and regain some balance in my life. But to the point, and I put this tweet out a long time ago, is like the biggest challenge that we have with NFTs today is is that we call everything an NFT. Snoop's music is an NFT. The 10K collectible pictures are NFTs. Generative art is NFTs. This habitat that's launching, that's going to be Web3 art architecture. They should have called it architecture. Would have, that's an NFT. And in the real world, we call it baseball cards, trading cards, plastic toys. We call it LPs. We call it CDs. We call it movies, VHS, Betamax. We call it concert tickets. We call it movie tickets. We call all these things different things, and they all have their own inherent value. And I think the biggest challenge that we have right now is that it's all compartmentalized in this concept, and then the mind like starts to wrap around it. And I think we're moving in the right direction. But I do think that like that's part of the challenge that we have. And so and people already get the idea of digital ownership. Like we've gone through this with MP3s, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the reason that like everyone freaked out back in the day about Napster is because it didn't represent digital ownership. Like you have the song, you can listen to the song forever, but you can't get royalties off of that song, right? You can't do these things. And like talking to Ice Cube yesterday, it's like holy crap. Like whether Big Three becomes like a new wave of things, and like for me, like I love hockey, and like when I'm watching power play hockey, it's exhilarating. When I watch the Big Three, power play hockey is like so different from like 5-on-5 hockey. Like 3-on-3, like imagine watching like a league of hockey players that are just playing power play hockey. Like the entire game changes, the strategies change, everything else. And now everyone's just talking about basketball, like it falls into that same bucket. But now imagine that like you could own a part of a team, and like it's not actually like you don't have to go hire players and coaches and handle payroll and those things. They're like the UFC. It's all corporately owned, right? All the players' salaries, the commissioners, the coaches, they're all that. But essentially, you're buying rights to the merchandise. You're buying rights to voting on how some of those strategies play out for that team. And those, so it's actually like a unique experiment that wouldn't work in like the legacy sports worlds. It's kind of similar to like the gaming leagues that are popping up left and right. So all that combined, and now you have ownership to take advantage of the proceeds, the fame,
Mhm.
derivatives, and those types of things. And then you add all that, and it's just like incredibly exciting to see like where we're headed from this aspect. And I think discourse, you're saying it really well, like fan controlled sports. Like for me, I wish I had the money right now to buy an NFT culture team, right? I think like how cool it would be to build the community, to invite our token holders to come and go to that, to be able to on road games, to be able to watch our team in the metaverse. And so I think there's going to be some teams that pop up, some projects that pop up that actually go in on this. And then you start thinking about, okay, this is, we're going to be standing on the shoulders of giants. And for me, that's really, really compelling and really exciting.
Yeah, and this is where like people, it's just the whole environmental thing just makes me laugh because like imagine you have a baseball team in the legacy world. I'm a baseball fan, so I'm going to translate everything to baseball. But you have your baseball team in the legacy world. You got to build $1 billion stadium. How much carbon is that? You have to like let's take a Dallas baseball team where it has urban sprawl and no mass transit to that stadium. Now you have people from a gigantic Dallas metroplex, Dallas Fort Worth metroplex, traveling to the middle of it by car to go to that game every single day, 165 days a year, 40,000 people doing that. Now, let's say you figure out, I really like this idea of Big Three and trying to figure out how to like digitalize the stake in it. Because imagine if you had a league of virtual teams playing some virtual sport in the metaverse. And now, instead of having 50,000 people 165 days a year commuting by car to this stadium, you have 100,000 or a million people commuting just virtually to the stadium to watch the virtual sport. Like that amount of carbon savings is massive. And if it requires a couple servers to run it, like yeah, it's gonna everything is gonna require energy. But first off, your most of this all stuff is hosted on Amazon, which can consume energy at scale, so it's going to be efficient. But you're also not doing all of that people moving. Like I think
Not even just flying the private jets around to get the players
that
to the
too.
space.
I didn't even factor in the air travel that
There's
that they
so many
use, and
things to think about. The
yeah,
hotel, the weight, the waste, the buses. Like there's so many things that like
yeah, the
you
food
like
and beer that the fans consume. Like it's so much. There's so many things. Like when you do them at a digital scale, you can do them for a million times more people for the same impact. And yes, the fundamental layer where we're starting out the system, it is intensive, but think of all of the possibilities that we can layer onto that base layer and how those can save. And the only other point I'll make is like we have a population of 8 billion people on the planet, and only maybe a billion people are kind of in the first world where they have like access to luxury goods and they don't worry about getting food and stuff. So eventually, like because we've kind of increased the access to education, we're going to be able to bring the other 7 billion people into the first world, which is a great thing. But the planet, and we don't have the carbon budget to produce all of the goods for those 8 billion people. We're going to have to figure out some solution. Maybe we'll invent super efficient carbon scrubbing and that'll solve the problem. Maybe. I don't know. Who
yeah.
knows? Maybe everybody will move to nuclear power and that'll solve the problem. Who knows? But an easy solution to provide a nice quality of life for those 8 billion people is to digitize the things that don't have to be physical. And food, it will always have to be physical, and you'll always need a living space. But the rest of things, like if I own a Ferrari in a game or I own a Ferrari in my garage, there really is no difference. I can,
The
if I have a,
rarity's still there, right?
the rarity is the same. If I have a sufficiently good driving simulator, then the experience is even the same. So then, in fact, the digital one might actually be better because I can go drive on Circuit of Americas down in Austin, or I can go drive at the on Monaco in, I mean, on the Monaco GP track in Monaco. So the digital experience is actually better than the physical experience, and only a few purists will ever really care about the physical experience long term. And it's so much cheaper to provide the digital experience to so many more people. So I think we got to give the Nifty and crypto ecosystem a fair shake to
Yeah.
to to flesh out those um, beneficial mechanisms.
I want to make one more comment, and then let's wrap with kind of why, why are projects still using inefficient contracts?
Oh yeah,
But my did you see Sailor on
on Lex.
yeah, like
Yeah.
the thing that stuck with me that's profound, and this doesn't associate to NFTs, but this associates to abundance and inefficiencies of colleges and tenure and everything else. But like the metaphor of like the fact that you and I both like I think you and I both we spend a lot of time on YouTube and like education and like the free education and tutorials and all that type of stuff and like
Hmm.
his thoughts on Harvard and all that stuff and like all that is interesting. And I think like when you think about the evolution of society, I think without the Ivy Leagues and those types of things, like there's a time and a place for all these types of things, and the mass adoption of the internet, the mass adoption of education, bringing the rest of the world into the first world. Controversial, but I'm a big fan of Steven Pinker's book Enlightenment Now that talks about the fundamental data that shows like how a lot of parts of our lives are getting better, not all of them, not for everybody, but on a macro scale you can say that the mortality rate, all that stuff, and I don't want to get into all of that. But then like the idea and the concept that like why are we brute forcing hundreds of thousands of algebra teachers instead
Hmm.
of finding the very very best algebra teachers for that age group and then making that teacher accessible at scale
Hmm.
and that methodology at scale for the masses, and then having someone do that. And then what that does is it frees up all of the other algebra teachers to focus on their passions, those things, those that. And I think like and NFTs may or may not have some form factor, Web3 may not have some benefit of that, but as we become more digital, I suspect it's going to have a role. I don't have a thesis or a hypothesis about how non-fungible tokens play in that space, but it really resonated with me as we think about the digitization of everything.
Yeah, I think the number one thing that Nifties do like today is they're incentivizing the development of the metaverse, and the metaverse could lead to situations where like you can do online courses and stuff from like MIT and things, but for some of their content, but it's just not the same experience as physically being at college. And I think the metaverse is capable of making it be the same or better of an experience, at which point people will no longer be able to make a compelling case of why we need to physically go to a different state to get our education. Like that doesn't really make sense. Like we should be educating people virtually. And virtual education is really hard, but it's hard because we don't have the tools. And metaverse, a compelling metaverse um, creates the tools, and the compelling metaverse will only be built if the monetization is there. So I think we got to just give this whole thing room to grow. That's why I think maybe those developers are a little short-sighted in having that opinion.
Muted. No, I couldn't. I couldn't agree more. Um, do we have do we have time? Should we save inefficiencies of contracts for another time?
Yeah, let's save it.
All right. All I want to ask is one question:
Sure.
is there a reason for many of the contracts that, if you're building a game on chain, you probably don't want to use, like, you may need to customize and do a lot of crazy things. But for most projects, especially projects of the PFP 10K time kind, the ERC 721A is like the way to go, right?
For sure. And one thing that people need to be aware of is like the ERC 721A code base is constantly evolving, and it's led by a guy named Vectorized. This is pseudonym, and another guy who I'm going to not say his name and accidentally not give him credit. But these two guys like diligently run that thing, and it is constantly growing. And so if you had a perception of like in the first version you couldn't burn tokens in ERC 721A, and then they fixed that, and then in the first version, using owner of function is really expensive on chain. And then they came out with this extension method that doesn't fix it completely, but it'll fix it if you have a fixed mint. So they fixed a large use case of it. So like people need to be aware that that thing is continuing to evolve. And at this point, it's an extremely well constructed contract with very little con compared to the original reference ERC 721 contract. And so like one of the things I've been working with lately is a lot of people reach out to me to do code reviews and stuff. So the first I've had to talk to these people to various different people a couple of times now about like, you didn't use ERC 721. Talk to me what your thought process was when you made that decision, because most likely, like, I don't see anything in your contract that would preclude you from using it. And so you might have based it on old assumptions. So I would say ERC 721A is awesome. If people are watching this and want to know like what they should use as a starting point, definitely try to use the latest version of that. It's in GitHub under Chiru Labs. It's GitHub. You can get an NPM package just called ERC 721A is the package name. So try to start from there and only stop using it after you try to use it and you ran up against some wall. And if you did run up against some wall that precludes you, go chat with the devs. You can put in a ticket against the GitHub and talk to them. And sometimes I'll chime in on those and help people out. So I think it's a really solid contract, and it really doesn't make sense for 99% of people not to use it. And every time I see a project using just the base ERC 721 and then having like 200 plus K gas costs for their mints because they tacked a lot of stuff onto it, I'm just like, why? But you know, right now Gwei is really low, and so it's letting people get away with it. But if we have like continued growth in usage, especially if a metaverse starts kicking in, then people are really going to be kicking themselves.
Great, great overview.
Yep.
I think one of the things that people don't think about is like, being inefficient at the start means that every transaction is inefficient in the future. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think it's important, for the permanence of these contracts as well, right? So
Yeah,
even though gas is low today, once again, to your point, um, there could be impacts in the future. Like we've talked about this a
absolutely.
lot. If we could go back and redo some things, knowing what we know now, but no one in the world knew it was possible back then. We do it, and I think this space is innovating so much. And like, I think historically, we're going to reach a point where, like, depending on how much gas you pay for an item, you're going to know how much it, like, what era of Ethereum it was on. So
Yep.
it's interesting, but we're going to get back to the Tech Tuesdays. I think it's important. I think this is the stuff that Mike and I are excited to have fun with. Molly and I will be back tomorrow morning, kind of doing the daily, 10, 20-minute show. Looking to have some more guests on in the near future. We're going to be focusing on VCon in the near future. If you haven't liked us, please like it, subscribe it, do all the things that help us as we restart, regrow. Ashley and the rest of the team is going to be doing more content. Join us in Discord. We've got a good group. A lot of the channels are hidden, so it may seem like there's not a lot of action, but don't be afraid to ask questions. We're here to answer anything we can. Mike, any final thoughts?
No, I'm just doing my thing, trying to build up some stuff, get some cool value for the Nifty Cult token holders too. So plug our our community token a little bit.
Hell yeah. All right, everyone. Have a good one.
See you guys.